Hey guys, welcome back to another sketching tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at linear perspective, what it is, some techniques on how to use it, and where it came from. This is a basic drawing technique that can help you visualize three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface using very simple line and shape. As you practice what I'm going to show you, keep in mind that linear perspective is similar to pretty much all other artistic processes. You start simple, and after you've built a foundation, then you can start adding your details. So what you don't want to do is start with your details in the beginning. Let's first take a look at where this technique came from. A minute in history, linear perspective during the Renaissance. The Renaissance, which started roughly in the mid-1300s, was a major art movement that brought back the classics. I guess you could say it was a rebirth in classic Greek ideas, mostly because everything had been moving away from those ideas during the Middle Ages. For art, many techniques and inventions were created, linear perspective being one of the major things invented during the early Renaissance. The Renaissance began in Florence, which is a small city in the middle of Italy. Artists were employed under patrons, or someone who funded and supported the arts during the time. Because there were many talented artists, the patrons would hold competitions between them to see who was worthy of creating art for the city and the church. One of the more famous competitions of the early Renaissance was the design and creation of the doors of the baptistry at the Florence Cathedral. The structure of a cathedral is broken down into three main parts. So it's the baptistry, the main building, and the bell tower. A more famous example of this is Pisa, located in Pisa, Italy, very close to Florence, with its iconic leaning tower. The competition for the doors of the baptistry came down to two artists, Filippo Brunelleschi and Lorenzo Ghiberti, both who were skilled goldsmiths. But in the end, Brunelleschi ended up losing to Ghiberti's design. After the competition, Brunelleschi ended up leaving Florence and went to Rome with his friend Donatello, where he stayed for 10 years. During his 10 years in Rome, Brunelleschi became interested in architecture through sketching and studying the ruins of the old Roman city. In order to help him visualize architecture on a two-dimensional surface, he invented a method that involved lines that converged into a single point. He found that this allowed you to draw and visualize precise architecture in realistic space, but on a two-dimensional surface. With this knowledge, Brunelleschi returned to Florence and participated in the competition for designing the dome of the cathedral, which was a task that was started in 1296, just before the beginning of the Renaissance. He won this competition, and with his knowledge also in engineering, was able to build the dome, which is actually a dome within a dome using multiple materials such as brick, wood, and plaster. Brunelleschi went on to do many more great things in Florence before he died, but his invention of linear perspective and building the dome in Florence are his greatest accomplishments, both of which influenced many great painters, architects, and engineers after him. Let's go ahead and get started. The tools you'll need are right here. When you first start drawing your lines, draw very, very lightly, because a lot of the lines, when using linear perspective, you will go back and change. The lines that you start out with are kind of like guidelines. When using linear perspective, you need to first establish two things: your horizon line and your vanishing point. You can think of the horizon line as your eye level going up and down, and the vanishing point is where your eye looks left to right. For anything that you draw with this technique, you want to start out very simple and basic. You can see that I'm starting out with a very simple rectangle, just a flat shape, that I will then use the linear perspective technique with, and the more shapes and lines that I include on the basic shape, the shape becomes more and more detailed. After you establish a flat shape, what you want to do is match any corner to the dot that you can, to your vanishing point. Then you will use parallel lines to basically cut off the shape. Other things that you want to think about when using this technique are proportion and overlapping. So think about how the shapes fit into the space. Of course, shapes that are closer to the viewer are going to be much larger. Shapes that are further in the distance are going to be smaller. This is a very important rule when using linear perspective. What I'm doing in this composition is drawing multiple shelves. Shelves are a great object to draw because it gives you practice on how to use the vanishing point. And what you can see is I'm drawing multiple shelves on one side of the vanishing point, on the other side of the vanishing point, above the horizon line, below the horizon line, on top of the horizon line. And by doing this, it shows that depending on where you place the object, it is going to have a different perspective. Here's my composition up to this point. You can see that I've included multiple objects that vary in size, with larger objects appearing closer to us and smaller objects appearing further away. I also show overlapping by making objects in the front appear to be on top of objects in the back. Using proportion this way with the linear perspective technique helps to give my composition a realistic three-dimensional space.